Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading property experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, and Ben Kingsley, Chair of Property Investment Professionals of Australia, and the 2014 and 2015 Property Investment Advisor of the Year.
Alright folks, you're on the Property Couch, where each week Ben and I bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management. Welcome back to the couch.
Mate, just let's start. I'm excited about today because
I know.
we've got
all guests.
I know.
You were a bit sort of, remember I was at the beginning,
hashtag
now he's on board.
Well,
now he's on
I'm meeting
board.
all these celebrities. It's
I know.
amazing.
Well, we've got another one coming up today, which is awesome. But Craig Rosevear.
Rosevear.
Or as he likes to be referred to, Rosie.
Rosie, we're allowed to call him Rosie.
Is an Australian drummer and auctioneer from Newcastle who joined hard rock group The Screaming Jets from 1993 to 2001. In 2001 to 2015, he relocated to the United States and was a member of American band Cinderglass. By 2005, he'd returned to Australia and set up a musical school, Rosie's School of Rock. I just can't help think of Jack Black when Rosie's School of Rock.
You know, why reinvent the wheel?
In
on the shoulders of giants.
In Newcastle, focusing on performance and band coaching for kids. But in 2017, Ben,
Yes.
Craig won the Newcastle Heat of the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales auctioneering competition. I mean, the Screaming Jets were a staple Aussie rock pub band in the 90s, the 80s and the 90s. Welcome, Craig.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you very much for having us, Bryce and Ben, and fantastic to see you guys in person. I've listened to your podcasts, I've read the book, and it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
The feeling's mutual, don't worry about that. But let's get down to the really important things, Ben. What's it like to be in a band?
You're a rock band.
It's absolutely fantastic. It's like the people in the band, you're like brothers and sisters, and the crew's part of the family, and you're all working towards one goal. And you know, we're teaching the kids at School of Rock, when they're in their bands, they might be 7, 8 years old. I said, this is great training for later on in life, because I went to university, and a lot of the things we did there was all group-based learning. I said, learning to work within a team, a dynamic, that's a great skill set to have, and it's something that I love to have the team environment behind me. I've learned a lot from being in that team environment myself. So
So the peak of your powers, you guys were the hottest rock group in Australia.
Number one band in Australia, absolutely.
You were the number one band in Australia. What was the album that got you?
Well, Tear Thought was the second album. Awful One was the first album. That's kind of made the big splash.
Yep.
But we kind of came to the peak of our powers, I guess, around 1995, 96. And we had Helping Hand.
Yep.
Before that was Better.
Yep.
Then later on we had October Grey, which is another big hit, sad song. So we spent a lot of time in Melbourne, and it's like my second home in many regards. We did a lot of TV shows down here, some great stories from that, a lot of fun. Hey It's Saturday.
I was about to say,
we did that
Hey,
many times. They used to do it, had another one on Channel 10, I think it was Coca-Cola something.
Yeah,
that was a good time. We didn't do the Melbourne, but we done the Sydney one.
Yeah, the NRL.
I actually did it earlier this year, funnily enough. With the Screaming Jets many years. But we did it back in the 90s, and it was a great time to be in music. And I was really fortunate to be in there with such great guys and a really good band with a great work ethic that, still to this day, we're very close.
Formed in Newcastle. So the majority of the members
from
Newcastle, or was it all Newcastle boys?
To start off with, it was all Newcastle guys, and Newcastle had a bit of a rock pedigree. After the Screaming Jets came Silverchair.
Yes.
But before that, there was bands like DV8 and the Heroes, and of course this is pre-internet days, so it was harder to get the word out. Bands used to have to tour around and that sort of thing. But there were some bands and musicians that were very influential on us. And we kind of wanted to do what they did, but take it a little bit further. So, the Screaming Jets was that. And if you listen to the lyrics of Better, say you never get anywhere.
You don't care. It's just nothing.
And I know better. It was that mindset of I don't care what you say. I'm just going to do what I say.
Hang on, mate. Should we do the song? Pause for you.
Say you never get anywhere. They don't care. It's just not fair. Anyway, We go back into my high school uni days with that stuff.
So what does the Screaming Jets look like now? Do you guys catch up? Do you see each other? Do you bust out a few sort of notes?
Well, the band's been together now for 25 years. So I left back in maybe 15 years ago to head overseas, and Dave Gleeson, the singer, he's still in the band, and Paul Wassine, the bass player, and he's songwriter as well, he's still in the band. There's a bunch of other really good musicians around them now that have been with them for many years. Good guys. The mentality is still the same. The level of musicianship, it's all still there. So it's still a quality act, and they just did a really big tour recently. And I filled in them from this year. We did the footy show in Sydney, which was great to reconnect and play again with the guys. And
you still got it. You didn't lose the rhythm.
I've never lost it.
And so we were talking just off air before. You obviously did some big tours as well. Like you did some supporting acts for some of the world's biggest bands. Yeah. So let's drop a few names here. Kiss, Def Leppard. Any other?
Well, my very first tour when I was 19 years old was with Def Leppard.
Wow.
A national tour. I was in a band called BB Steels, my first signed band. And I was still at uni at that time. And I was really fortunate to be able to do that. But, uni, I kind of went back and got to the end of my studies. And then after that, I moved to Sydney, and did some music there. Then the Jets sort of called, and I did that. We did tour.
What does that look like? The Jets called. What does that mean? They just grabbed your number and said, "Hey, we've got this spot," or was there a bit of auditioning?
I knew Dave and Grant, who started the band with Paul for many years in Newcastle. They were in a band called Aspect, and I was in a band called Licks. And they would play the same venues as my band, so they might have played it on the Friday night, we did it on the Saturday night. And it got to be a bit of a joke because it was like, obviously the booking agent had no imagination. It was just like the same thing. So we'd leave each other little scribbled notes on the drum rides and, texter and whatnot, and messages of support, and we just had a mutual respect for each other, and they were looking to put together like a band of stronger musicians, and they had another drummer who was really good before me, and then he had a few personal issues, and then they gave me a call, and they were in America at the time, and I was like, "Hey Rosie, what are you doing?" I'm like,
just looking to maybe catch the next set down off the East Break or something like that.
I said, check the letterbox. There's a ticket for LA, and so I went flew over, and we just did a 3-month tour around America. That was my step into the Jets.
Talk us through that. Like you're in the Jets, you're going through America. This is reasonably PG rated.
This is the code of the road, so nothing will escape.
Code of the road.
Yeah.
Here we go.
But what's that? I mean, come on.
It was fantastic. I mean, I flew straight into Los Angeles. They were staying in some apartments in Studio City. They drove me through Sunset, past all the iconic places, the Whiskey, the Troubadour, the Cat Club. It's like Viper Room, all these places you'd read about.
And had they broken over there pretty well?
No, they were just about to kind of embark on taking on America. So they were just waiting for a drummer to arrive, which was me. It was a very exciting time in LA then too, because it was kind of just at the end of the grunge period. Things were starting to happen. And it was just a real dynamism in LA. And the venues, it was just really, really vibrant. And so, first we rehearsed for a few weeks, and then we went down to Texas. That was the first stop, and it was like, if you've ever seen a duck in water, that's a Screaming Jets in Texas. It was just like, oh my God. So that's
no boot scooting.
There was no boot scooting where I came from. There was crazy times, and it was like, Texas was made for the Screaming Jets, let me assure you.
Yeah, okay.
So we did some great places, met some great people, some crazy experiences, and then from there we went from Texas, and then we pretty much went all through the middle of America, and then East Coast to New York, and then we went up to Toronto, Canada,
Toronto,
and then went back and did it all again back to LA. So that was my first tour back. That was in 1993. So I was 23 years old.
So you're in the peaks of your powers at some stage. What was the biggest crowd that you played as the lead, and what was sort of some of the bigger crowds you played as support?
Yeah, one of my most memorable gigs was at the Sydney Cricket Ground.
Yep.
It was absolutely sold to capacity as a benefit for the bushfires. I mean, there's big bushfires through there back in the mid-90s, and it was like anyone, a Sting was there. It was like you walked around the backstage and it was just like, oh my God. I think Lenny Kravitz.
I know you. I know you.
It was pretty big. But my favourite gig was supporting Kiss. So I'm a big fan of Kiss, both musically and from a business perspective. And I missed them the first time they came out. I think it was 80, could have been 81. And I missed them then. I was a little bit too young. My parents wouldn't let me go, which is, everyone has their same story.
I was the same. I was in grade 5.
But when they came out in 96, I'm like, I'm not going to miss it. I bought the ticket, and then we found out that we had the support.
Wow.
So it was like, oh my God. So, it was like, be there at 5 o'clock for sound check. Well, I got there at 12 just to make sure I didn't miss one thing. So I did that, and it was magic. It was such a good gig, I think we had a 20-minute spot. It seemed to go in a blink of an eye, but when Kiss came on, it was just wow.
And so what's it like, the adjusting of mindset of here you are in Newcastle and all of a sudden you get the call up at 23, you're living, a lot of male dreams of travelling around playing music and probably a little bit of female interest at the time as well. So what's that like?
The female interest?
Well, that's really what you're probably right.
That's what he wants to get to.
I do want to know that.
It's the old story. There's no such thing as an overnight success, and it was just part of a continuum that continues, still in different versions, but still same journey. It was like, this sort of started for me, music, when I was 10 years old, inspired by Kiss to pick up the sticks, and I always had a really good work ethic, and even back then, it was like, who's the best drummer in town? Who's the best teacher? How do I get to the best teacher and get to be better than the best guy? And that was something that's been with me still to this day. So it was about finding good people and putting them around you. And then it was just so these things that happened, it was like, in isolation, it might look big, but it was a natural progression.
Now you got the School of Rock, and so kids come to you all the time. What's the easiest instrument for them to pick up quickly?
The one they like the most.
Is it?
Yeah, because it's the passion and the time. So sometimes parents will come in and say, I want my kid to play piano. And I ask the little kid, what do you want to do? I want to play guitar. Yeah. Well, parents are like, I want them to do the piano. I said, well, they want to play guitar. Yeah. But there is the easiest, in theory, instrument to learn is the keyboard, because it's very visual, requires the least amount of technique to actually hit the notes. The most fun is probably the drums. The most confronting for many people is vocals, because it's your voice. But I think
high risk, high reward though. Everyone knows
that's
the
right.
front guy is,
exactly. And the guitar's cool to do as well. Who doesn't want to have a guitar hanging on their wall, and it looks cool when you walk into the gig in the case.
To November Rain with Slash. But, Ben, people might be wondering, why are we talking about music? Why are we talking about having a drummer on? It's because this was a quote from Rosie in the paper. With my first royalty check, I invested in property. In Newcastle, I bought an investment property. When I came back from overseas, the place had doubled in value.
Absolutely. So what happened is that we'd tour, and they'd give us an allowance per week, and then it was a really good system. So we get a little bit of money, pocket money through the week, and then at the end of a tour, whatever's, the profits, they'd split 5 ways amongst the band. So you could do whatever you wanted with that money. Some guys bought guitars, some guys whatever, and I just left it in the bank, and I saved enough money through the weekly, we could per diems back then.
Per diems in the television industry,
yeah. Then one day I used to live in Potts Point, which for those people who are not from Sydney is pretty much...
It's rough. It's really rough.
With King's Cross. It's in the middle of King's Cross. I loved it then. And in the 90s, there were some real characters. It's a lot different these days, but it had a real charm to me, and that's where all the musicians lived. So, I used to pop down to the Westpac Bank then and, put my money. It was real money back then. You could actually count it. Yeah. You saw it. You don't see it anymore. You don't see it anymore. And I was in there one day, and the bank manager, you don't see them anymore either. He's like, I knew him by name. I can't remember what it is now, but he's like, oh, Rosie, you got a bit of money in your account now. I said, you ever thought about getting a home loan? I'm like, no. Tell me more. So, so I didn't even think about it back then. I was more concerned with, my eye was on the ball. The ball was, being in a big band and being successful with the band. So the money was just like, it was good, but it was a byproduct of my natural, passion.
Yeah, and work ethic.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's still work.
Yeah, exactly. So he said, you should really think about buying a home. And then at the time, we're just about to have our first baby, Corey, who's now 21 years old, lives in Melbourne, goes to uni at Monash. Yeah. No, he's
catching up with him whilst you're down.
I will be.
Of course,
after this.
Course.
Yeah. So we're like, I don't know if we should be worried about living in the cross with our little kid coming in. So we started to look further afield in Sydney, and it was pretty evident that we probably weren't going to be able to get what we wanted. And then we went up to Newcastle to visit my parents. We looked at some places there, and it was like, oh my God, I can buy a pretty nice place.
Yeah.
So we bought that. It was a nice. We did renovate and anything like that. And then I moved overseas years later, and then I bought another place. When we came back, that place cost $112,000. Another one cost $126,000. The one that cost $112,000 when I came back was worth $247,000, valued by the bank.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, what can we do with that? And I didn't want to move into it because it was an investment property. It was probably not an area I wanted to go into. And then someone came up with this word that I hadn't really heard before called equity. And equity, people, equity, very important. They said you could use, that place has gone up, you can use that to get a deposit for another place. And so we did. We renovated it ourselves. And
so what are we talking, the mid-90s here, late 90s?
So now I'd been overseas, so we're talking about early 2000s.
Early 2000s,
yeah. So, me and my wife, Belinda, we renovated this place, did everything with her dad, Bill. He's a builder, so he kind of, instructed us. He did a lot of work too, but he was a great mentor for us, and he was like, you need to find a place you can add value to, So, an apartment, unless you you can paint it, you can do some minor things, but a house, you can do big stuff with, So, so we started, that's what we're looking at, houses. And so we renovated that, got a valuation, post-renovation, and we had more equity.
No equity!
And so by that time, we looked around at what was happening in the market in Newcastle, and it kind of was pretty hot there. So we're like, I wonder where we can afford next. So we just looked around, and it was the old trend, it'd gone big in Melbourne, it'd gone big in Sydney, it'd been big in Adelaide, and Brisbane hadn't gone big yet. So we jump on the plane and we go up to Brisbane. How much money we got? What can we afford? We look around, and we could only afford an apartment. That's all we could afford. So we bought an apartment in St Paul's Terrace, and it was 43 square metres. And I think the bank would only loan on somewhere that was like 44 square metres or something ridiculous. Anyway,
45 normally.
Anyway, we got it through. And then funny, so we looked at it. We only saw it for probably 10 minutes, then went off and made an offer because we're looking at the yields and just the figures was purely for investment. So we went attached to it. After a little while, maybe a year, we're like, we should go up and look at that place now. And we went up there, and it was a bit old looking, a bit warm. So we thought, what we should do? We should come up and paint it one weekend. Maybe we'll stay at this really nice hotel about South Bank.
Put the overalls on.
And we'll go up there and we'll paint. And we had, by this time, we've got another kid, Gypsy. I think she was probably 4. And it'll be fun. She can help paint and all this sort of stuff. Anyway, it was a nightmare.
I was going to say, what part of that was going to be really good?
None of it worked. It was like, I think we must have painted for maybe 18 hours straight. We got back to this beautiful hotel, this really nice part of town. Slept for 6 hours, go back, more painting. And so we got it done. But we're like, man, we worked our figures. We might maybe save $50 if we had got a painter to do it. So
we tell this story.
You learn your lessons.
One of those life stories.
It's always a learning experience.
So were you accumulating and keeping them, or have you moved some of them on?
We kept all those for a few years, and then I went to university and did a marketing degree, which is something on my bucket list I always wanted to do, and I knew it would be helpful for the next stage, which is to set up Rosie School of Rock, which was a music school, a performance-based music school. So up until this point, music lessons was like if you want to learn guitar, you go into some back room at some guy's house or the music store, you learn smoke, start a smoke on water, and you leave. Next week you come in, the G chord, bang, see you the next week. Next week you come in and here's Peter Gunn, you know. So you're learning little bits and pieces, but there wasn't any clear sort of end point. And I'm like, that's really weird that people do that. So I started thinking, well, it's better if people learn a song, like an actual song. You can play a song, you can get up and jam with it and stuff. So I started doing that with my drum students, and by this time I've been teaching drums since I was 15 years old. So I'd been teaching a lot. Like I'd in Newcastle, first year uni, I was teaching 6 days a week. I was making a lot of money just from that. You know, but it was like it was all spent on gear. So if I made $1,000 that week, it was $1,000 worth of drums that week. There was no, it was simple. So so it got to a point where I had all these drummers that were actually playing songs, and then their brothers or sisters, the parents were like, oh, do you know a guitar teacher? I said, yeah, but the guy's over the other side of town. I'm thinking, wouldn't it be great if a kid could learn guitar and played the song that his brother or sister is learning on the drums? And then wouldn't it be cool if we could get a singer and then we'll put a whole band together and then go do a gig? Wouldn't that be fun? And it was like rocket science. It's like, so anyway, what we did then was got all the equity that we could out of the
the portfolio.
And then we built a purpose-built studio in Newcastle that was like a recording studio basically. You know, fully decked out, all the gear, all the rooms. We had a big room, that's what we call the jam room. We still do it, and lights and PA, and we had little areas where the parents could sit. And then that just went berserk, you know, but people just thought it was great, and we thought it was great too. So we built that, and then along the way we were like, wow, this has gone really good. We need a bigger place. So the next step was, okay, how much more, because that costs a lot of money to fit out, you know, and when you paint walls, you can't really take the wall with you, you know, so like you just invest the money, but when you move, you lose some. So we built this next one, was like, the best thing you've ever seen. It was like 2 levels and whatnot. And so then I tapped into the equity for that. Then in the meantime, my wife, she wanted to have another baby, or we both did. And she wanted to move to a nice part of town, a suburb called Merriweather for people in Newcastle. It's like the blue ribbon suburb. And it was one of those things
human interest, human behaviour, going to the right part where everyone else wants to go, paying a premium to get in there.
Well, it was like this, and it still is actually. It's you know, it's kind of like, for people not from Newcastle, it's like the Bondi, I guess, of Newcastle. It's on the beach.
It's not far from the beach hotel, is it?
It's very.
Right.
The beach hotel's opposite the beach.
I know where it is.
So so we wanted to get in there, and it was like, you know, there's 1,000 people want to buy that weekend, and there's 3 properties for sale, you know. So it's like, it was hard to get in, and you go to open homes, you see the same people at every one, and it's like, okay, this is a really tight market, but we're lucky enough to get a foothold in there. So we sold then to move into, except for one of the places that we bought initially.
Early on.
But you own the commercial premise for the business though?
Not at this stage.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're renting.
Yeah.
And they're, you know, with the 5-year lease or whatever what case was. And so then we got the house in Merriweather, and we've got this fantastic school. Plus, we still had one of the investment properties. Then they had a big flood in Newcastle, 2008, I think it was. It was crazy. Our school got flooded. You know, it was brought the town to a standstill. Our investment property was submerged from about the 6-foot mark under.
Wow.
So it was like there was houses going down the street. Anyway, the insurance company said, you can take this amount of money or we'll fix it yourself. So my wife...
You didn't go there again.
She knows how to paint from the Brisbane experience.
Gypsy's a bit older now. She can hold 2 brushes in both hands.
No kidding.
Like
so
drumming.
My wife says, oh, no, we'll take the money and we'll just do it ourselves. At that point, the Newcastle Council came to me, Rosie, would you mind putting on a benefit concert for all the people who have helped during the floods and all the families who need money? Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Well, that was a massive
massive
thing.
You organise it.
So I'm doing that, and sorry, Belinda, you'll have to do that place on your own. So this place so she did the full reno on this place, and then did the full reno with insurance money, and then we got a bank valuation after that, and a double in price again. Okay, so it's a bit of a cash cow, I guess. We moved into Merriweather, which is a lovely area. And so, we sold the apartment in Brisbane to kind of fund all this.
How did that one go, the Brisbane one?
Well, I think we, I can't remember the exact figures now, but we made probably about maybe 50 grand on it. Something like that. I can't remember exact figures. It was,
It's interesting in listening to your story. I mean, the first thing, it's around, I'm trying to get the times right, but it's around 2000 that you're in Potts Point and you're looking to buy, and you decide to buy in Newcastle because housing was too unaffordable in Sydney. Now, isn't it interesting, like we're now in 2017, and for the last 3 or 4 years we've been going on about how unaffordable Sydney is, but in relative terms it was technically unaffordable as well, for what you were looking for to meet your purpose. So that purpose fit that took you out to Newcastle and said, well, I can buy something for 115 grand or $112,000. So I'm in the market, I'm in the game, and it's done really well for you. So I think from that point of view is that, right throughout all of this history and when we're talking to other people about their stories, and especially when we go and speak to 55-year-old and 60-year-olds who talk about housing affordability, their first thing, don't worry, it was hard in my day too. So there is that element of, it's all relative to the circumstances.
If I, in retrospect, there was a few things I wish had happened and a few things I could have done differently. I think it's kind of like, when you have a kid, your parents give you advice, your first kid, and they say, well, we did this, we did this, we did this. And that's good advice for them in their time, but things have changed since then, So now, obviously raising a baby is different than what it was, 30 years, 40 years ago. Same with investment advice. So, parents back then, they wanted to buy their forever home right there, And I think a lot of younger couples make the mistake of thinking that their first purchase has to be the home they live in. I think that's a really critical mistake. And, you can buy anywhere, really, whatever money you have at that time, because, even if you 23-year-old me, I didn't have to buy in Newcastle, really. I could have bought it and still lived in Sydney, or I could have bought in Brisbane or somewhere else, but that wasn't even in my vocabulary. I didn't understand you could do those sort of things, but now it's really, really clear.
Well, isn't it amazing how the world has changed in that respect? I mean, we talk about years ago, we go to a train station and we'd have to wait 20 minutes or 30 minutes for a train. The frequencies weren't so great because the population wasn't going. You order a cab, you had to ring up and then the register, and then the cab was 15 or 25 minutes away. Now, these days, if your Uber doesn't turn up in 3 minutes or 5 minutes, if your train's not coming through every 5 or 10 minutes, you're thinking, what's going on? If you have to wait 30 minutes for a plane trip between Melbourne and Sydney, there's something wrong. So we've definitely developed this instant need, this instant gratification now. And as you were saying, everyone wants to buy their dream home now rather than stepping up the property ladder. And you've been a perfect example of that. You got your foot in the door, you stepped up, you did another one and another one, and then you thought, okay, now I want to be serious. So you crystallised the sales of those to get to Merriweather. You're in the dream home now, and you're probably going to continue on your investment journey.
And we are, as we speak.
Well, Rosie, we take it back. A lot of people who would have a stereotype of people in a well-known band would probably think they'd spend their money on lifestyle options rather than real estate. But you tended to buck that very early. So was there mentors? Who was guiding that path for you? I know the bank manager said, hey, you've got some equity, you should buy it. But part of it's having the confidence and the mindset to actually keep progressing and buying more. Was there someone significant?
Well, Grant Walmsley, he was a guitar player from a Jets. He was the first guy in the band to buy a home. It was like, he bought a lovely house and he renovated himself. And did a great job on it.
So on the tour bus, he's the one reading the money magazines and the Fin Review and all that sort of stuff?
He's on the realestate.com app.
No apps back then, mate. I don't think there was an internet.
hence I went to the Fin Review or money.
No, I think it was just one of those things where, good parental advice. You got a little bit of money. do something with it. Don't squander it. You know, you look at musicians in general or entertainers, and you can generalise. Not everyone's crazy and wacky. There's that element for sure, but other people are.
A lot of people take advantage of the bigger money that they get and park it, like in other bands that you've met and other entertainers that you've come across.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a band called Live. Remember those guys? They had a song called Lightning Crashes. Yeah. Well, one of the road crew guys from the Jets has just finished working for them. They got into optic fibre cables and made millions of dollars with that, and built some gigantic facilities. And they did that as a band. So
Wow.
So
funny you say that. A mate of mine flicked me a text over the week and goes, "Mate, do you want to come see Live at the My Music Box?"
Yeah, I'll go see them.
I haven't got back to it.
Yeah, Kiss, a classic one to me. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, they were the reason I picked up the drumsticks in the first place. But when I lived in LA, I worked at a music studio, and one of the guys there, he worked in the Kiss warehouse. I said, "Kiss warehouse? What do you do?" He goes, "Well, Kiss release, box sets of things, and everything's numbered. The first, few thousand things are numbered." Yeah. He said, "Well, Kiss buy them and put them in their warehouse, but sit on it for 10 years and re-release it." And they've all got
like
this
the Star Wars collectibles.
Yeah, exactly. They've got
all these collectibles.
Pristine
That's
sort of
amazing foresight.
Yeah.
To do that.
Well, it was funny, and I think everyone can relate to this. We all look back and go, "Well, I could have done this better, this better, this better." But I'm doing okay now. You look at Kiss and you think, geez, they're smart. They've done everything really good. And I read a book about them, and it was in their early years. And everything you could have done wrong, they did. They made every mistake, and it wasn't until they were at the lowest point in the in the early '80s, just after they toured Australia, they went down, right? Yeah, and they rebuilt themselves, and they learned from all that stuff they did in the '70s. They relearned how to do it right. And so they've got it right now.
The makeup at one point there, didn't they? But that was all the mystery of who these people were. But John Bon Jovi is also. I mean, I don't know whether this is true or it's sort of a folklore, but John Bon Jovi, he employs the other members of his band. So Bon Jovi are actually employees of John Bon Jovi. So he owns the rights to the brand and the band. And so Richie Zambora and all those guys just got a salary, and so he had the business acumen at the time, and he's obviously very successful in business, owns studios and a few other things. So there you go. So I was sort of going back to the US. You must have had a good manager in terms of who was collecting the money and then giving you your sort of living and lifestyle fund whilst he was putting the other money away, or was that the band guys themselves? Like, who was managing the cash?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think this is not only for bands and musicians, but also in general. You've got to be very careful about who manages the money. And we had a really good accountant, a guy called Barry Moore, who used to be the accountant for the Sex Pistols. And then later, went on to fame later on. If Barry, you're listening to this, thank you very much. But he
send it out.
he was the Wiggles accountant. Oh. Yeah, and so he kind of kept us on track. But I think most importantly, we had a really, really good mentor, a guy by the name of Aaron Chugg. Absolutely fantastic. He was our tour manager, and he was the one that really got it sorted. And then he connected us with Grant Thomas, and he was the manager of Split Ends and Crowded House. Oh, yeah. So those guys put some real structure around us, and it was during having Aaron and Grant, and then our agency, they were very good, Harbour Agency. So we had a real infrastructure around us. So we worked all the time. We were averaging 300 shows a year.
Wow.
Okay,
wow.
So it wasn't like we were sitting around. It was like we worked a lot, and that's where the work ethic came from. So in a band, it's like you're up and down, You're only as good as your last hit. Sometimes they weren't all hits, and sometimes they were. So you have to be able to drive through those times where things aren't going so well, and to get to the point where things go really well.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and just again, but it just goes to show you. I mean, great question, Bryce, around mentors. You were was it who was leading those openings and getting to those right type of mentors? The people who were more interested in helping you than helping themselves, because you see some of these rock shows and these
Fans.
biographies, and it's all the manager trying to squeeze all the money out, and the band's left with nothing.
And that happened.
Yeah,
we did have some individuals like that, and it wasn't good at the time. You could tell these people had a dark cloud around them. You know, they'll mostly in life, not everyone wears a white hat or a black hat.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes they're wearing a white hat and you think that they're a good guy, but they're not. You know, so you got to, especially when you're young and you're so motivated to do certain things, you don't really pay attention so much to other things. But yeah, I mean, there was times where people ripped us off. There's no doubt about it. And there was a joke at the time. It wasn't a matter of if you're going to get ripped off. It was that you are. Yeah. It's just a matter of by how much. So, and we just had to, find people we thought were good, and sometimes they didn't work out to be good, and then they fall by the wayside, and you find out new people. But I think it was a matter of never being, if it stunk a little bit, you have to investigate it, basically. Yeah.
What's the downside of being in the public eye?
I don't find anything myself, but for my wife, I do talk to a lot of people, a lot of the places, if I'm shopping or stuff like that. She's like, why did it take you 3 hours to do the shopping?
It only took me 20 minutes to do the shopping.
So you're obviously a big local identity in Newcastle there. But do you get noticed, so if you're walking down the street in Melbourne now, would someone say, hey, Rosie, I love your work?
Give us a quick solo.
I just ran into a guy having lunch earlier.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
It's like, aren't you? He had a Kiss t-shirt. I said, man, I really like that band. He goes, oh, really? He goes, you look familiar to me. And then blah, blah, blah.
You get that.
Oh, you get that. I mean, the great thing about being in the Screaming Jets was you're touring all throughout Australia a lot. Mm-hmm. And not only the capital cities, but the regional areas. So we got to mix with a broad range of people from different demographics. For them, especially people living in regional areas who maybe didn't get a rock band come through all the time, it was, it's important to them. It was the soundtrack of their youth, and that's important. There's certain songs that might have got them through hard times, or other songs that connect with good times. So you have to respect that. And those people I met on the road 25 years ago that they still contact me on Facebook and whatnot.
So, question without notice: who are the good guys in Aussie rock? And if you want to go there, who are the guys who need a little bit of emotional intelligence and a little bit of decorum around how they operate around others?
Okay, so I think it's what happens is all young rock bands start off brash, and some people learn manners along the way and others don't. There's a lot of gentlemen out there in the music. People who are well respected by everybody. I just did a tour with Angry Anderson. He's one of those guys, a good stand-up guy. He has very strong views of things, but when it comes to morals and decency and honesty, he's one of them. Grant Walmsley, my buddy from Screaming Jets, he's another guy who's just like a pure
gives
style,
the time of day to others.
Dave Gleason, singer from the band, all the guys in the band, Paul was saying, they're all good guys. These people, it's like you don't get to be in the Australian music industry for so long if you aren't a decent person, because it's such a small industry that there'll be people that'll be happy to put the boot in. In America, it's a little bit different because there's if you alienate people in LA, it's almost an industry in its own, and then you can move on and go to the East Coast.
So did you get to meet the guys from Crowded House? Did you get In Excess? Did you cross paths with them in any way? Or were they just a little bit later? Or did you do anything with those guys? Or Barnsey, all the classics, Mossy? Any of those guys?
Mossy supported us for a while. Grinspoon, they supported us as well.
Oh, yeah.
The guys from Chisel, the Divinals.
Yeah.
Metal as Anything.
Oh, yes.
Those sort of bands. I mean, it's, you'd have to bring the band up because there's a lot of bands to remember.
Yeah.
Gangajang.
Yep.
Out on the patio.
There was a lot of bands.
So this, you've made the jump from, you've got the School of Rock, you've obviously in a band, but now you're an auctioneer. And you've been,
that's right.
You've been quoted as saying, Auctioning property isn't that different from playing music, especially the marketing campaign. It's comparable to promoting a gig.
Yep.
I like to call it rock-tioneering.
A rock-tioneer.
I've always thought of the auctioneer as the auction as street theatre, a form of performance. So tell us about the transition.
Well, yeah, a lot of people say that transition word, but I'm still don't see much of it. It is a natural progression. So, we've all got a bucket list. We've got things we'd like to do, and one thing I've always wanted to have a go at as auctioneer, because what happened over the years is that I played a lot of charity events, and often after the auction, the charity auction, the band plays, right? Mm-hmm. And I'd be looking at these auctioneers going, man, that guy could have done this, he could have done that better, I wish he had done that, or geez, what time is that? That's gone for a long time. And I thought, and like I've always liked being in front of people. I've got a loud voice, I'd like to present. And then someone said, you know what, you should go in this competition coming up. So what competition's that? And it was the New South Wales Real Estate Institute Novice Auctioneer competition. And I was the guy who mentioned to me, I was actually out surfing. I was sitting out the back, Merewether, with my favourite place, and we're having this discussion. And he said, you know what, this Wednesday night there's an auction in town. You should come to it. I said, okay, I will. So anyway, I head along, and I go in the room, and it was amazing. It was a big room. There was probably about 200-300 people in there. There was like a lot of people in there, and in walks this guy with an orange and white tie, and he was amazing. Yeah. And I'm like,
we've had him on.
Yeah. Let's go there.
That's Damien Cooley. Yes. So at the end, I go down. I said, "Oh, geez, I really enjoyed that," and I asked him a few questions, and he gave me about half an hour's worth of information.
He's a ripping fella.
Yeah, and he was very open, and I was asking him some advice for the competition. He gave me a heap of tips, and then I found out he was going to be there in 2 weeks' time again. So I would just keep popping along and getting a few more tips and adding to that. And then there was another guy in Newcastle, a very good auctioneer by the name of Gavin Reynolds, and he also started giving me some advice and offering me some tips. And then, when the competition came up, I kind of had some things down, and I won the Newcastle Heat, and that was to represent Newcastle in the state finals. And I didn't win the state finals. I got pipped by another guy trained by Damien Cooley.
I knew that.
But there's a good end of the story, because then he tapped me on the shoulder and said,
"Come and work for us.
Would you like to come on board?" And I'm like, you know what? But the energy of his team and himself, it's amazing, and they're good people, and that's something I've always, if you look back on my history, it's always trying to find the best teachers and the best team, and they'll get me to the next level and take me there.
So you're part of Cooley Auctions?
Exactly, yeah.
And are you the sole representative in that region?
Newcastle, yeah.
And how many auctions are there for you to call each sort of?
In Newcastle, it's pretty good for the auctions. Probably not as busy as Sydney is, but obviously there's less people there as well. But there's some agencies that do really well with auctions, and I've actually bought an auction myself. So one thing I like about auctions is the transparency of the process, because I've actually missed out on a couple of properties to these so-called other people, and one of them in particular that really hurt, like it stung. We're like, oh, I can't believe we missed out on that. And it was like, well, we offered this, but so someone offered something else, and well, why don't you get back to us, because we would offered more, but it never happened. So you'd be thinking, oh, is there some, what caused that? In auction, that doesn't happen. You can see who's bidding against you and how much they're bidding, and that's I know people sometimes may get intimidated by the process, but for myself and the good auctioneers I see, they create a very comfortable environment, and that's something that I know I bring to the table, is that I'm a people person. I'm a happy
it's
person.
Natural. Yeah, well, we've only just met you, and we're just feeling like we're talking like we're old mates.
Yeah.
The Newcastle market, well, we might as well talk about that. It's performing reasonably well, and it's actually got a lot of bit of interest from Sydney folk as well, hasn't it? Now the investors are starting to look to the Hunter and look to that sort of area. So tell us a little bit about the marketplace as it stands now.
Yeah, it's we're seeing that. So I was at an open home maybe a month ago, and it was an apartment on the beach, and there was 10 people there, and 6 of them were from Sydney. And I said, what's your plans? Do you want to move up here? They said, just an investment property for now, and when we're a little bit older, we'll probably move in. That was the same story from a lot of those people. So I think sub $1 million, there's a lot of interest from Sydney. I sold a place myself in Belmont when me and my wife did up and sold, and there's a lot of investors coming up from Sydney for that. It was on the southern part of Newcastle. It ended up being bought by someone relocating to Newcastle to work, but I think, sub 1 million, there's that. In excess of $1 million, I think it's mainly, it's still an active market. And because especially in areas like Bar Beach, coastal places near the beach, where there's just that limited supply, so everyone wants to try to get in there, and there's only a certain amount of homes. So when somewhere good comes for sale, the auction is a natural, option for them.
And what about vacancy rates and rental market? What's it looking like?
It's very good. It's
quite tight at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so look, it's a marketplace that we're running the numbers on at the moment. We know that there's a couple of other buyers agency businesses that are looking to buy up in that region, and it is a natural flow on, from that Sydney market.
Newcastle has never been better than it is now. Never been better. And I'm talking, I tell this story a lot, but I've been playing in bands for many years, and obviously bands play late at night. So, back in, say, the late 80s, there was one place where you could go get food after midnight, and it was the service station at Broadmeadow, and they had a hot chip machine. And that was the only thing you could have, right? So you go there, it wasn't even $2 coin. They didn't have that back then. It was like 20-cent pieces, and the hot chip thing would come down the bucket, and then the chips would cook, and they'd pour into the bucket. But what would happen every single time, the chips would come down so fast and knock the bucket on the side, so you'd only get about 5 chips out of the 20 that came down, and then you'd be like, oh man, I'm so hungry, you'd eat them, they'd scald your mouth, right? But now, all these years later, you had McDonald's open. That was like a big deal, 24-hour McDonald's, and that's one of the most busiest ones, the one in Newcastle. But now it's like, we've got everything in Newcastle that all the other capital cities have. So they've got an airport. I flew down today.
It's growing up.
So and they've done some great stuff in the East End of Newcastle and the CBD and the West End. It's just really, really going well, and it's set the tone for many years to come. So if you're looking to invest, Newcastle is a fantastic option. For the exact reason these people come up from Sydney going, I'll buy somewhere now, and in years to come, when life slows down, I want a nice place to live, I'll go to Newcastle. It's a great lifestyle there.
Beautiful weather. Yeah. I always see you on your Instagram with your Lycra and your bicycle and your helmet. You're obviously getting around, keeping fit.
There's too many options. There's what will I do today? Will I go surfing, mountain biking, ride my bike? I like to do something active.
Many gigs? Are you playing the drums much on those Saturday nights?
No, I've kind of, this year, knowing that auctioneering is, a strong future for me, I kind of been downsizing on that. So I've got a few festivals to do, 2 more this year, and I've just cut it down to one band next year that will just play, every 2 months or something like that.
Ben, I'll read a quote here. This is from Rosie. Plus, there's getting dressed up to work on a Saturday, whether it be a suit or a ripped pair of jeans, and the enjoyment of playing to a crowd. For those on the other side of the Rockstar fence, winning the auction would give them the chance to hang out with the Screaming Jets, including attending a sound check and front row at a gig, even the after-show party.
This was my prize for the auction comp.
Very good.
Very, very good. So, anything else? In terms of what are you seeing in terms of auctioneers? What tips can you give to the buyers from your perspective? That you see the mistakes that the buyers keep making, that they could do better? That's
a really good question. I think first thing that the buyer should do is not feel intimidated by the process, and part of that goes to going and looking at some auctions yourself, not just fronting up, and that the first auction you go to see is the one you bid at, because that is so understanding that there's rules and regulations that they're available on the New South Wales Department of Fair Trading website. You can see that, read through those, understand your role in the process, understand the agent's role and the auctioneer's role. I think if you have an understanding of the process, you won't be as intimidated. The other thing is, it's funny, but people often also set their limits at even numbers. So I'll bid up to 900,000. Well, if you had a bid 901,000, you probably would have got it. So I think that's something that needs to be discussed before you go. And you have to have a plan, but then once you arrive, you have to be flexible as well.
Yeah, it's important to know that if you're, you got a pre-approval for 600,000, it means you could still tick it over to 601 or 602. People live in, want to colour in the lines, and you're right. We as buyers agents have picked up many properties for 01, 02 or 56 or 57 just by not stopping on the standard 0 and 5. So I think that's a good tip.
And in some markets, not so much Newcastle, but I have seen it before where people are kind of want to see the auction fail in the hope that they'll get some sort of bargain on the price. And if you understand that kind of what doesn't work that way, because the vendor has an actual reserve price, and that's the price they're happy kind of to sell at. So, if you think that you're going to get some bargain because the vendor has to sell, they don't actually have to sell at all. It's like, only when they reach a price that they're happy with. But for a buyer, it's kind of good because if you buy under the auction conditions, there's no cooling off period, which means that you've secured that home on the day, and there's no chance of being, gazumped later on or whatever the case may be.
What's the worst thing a buyer can do to annoy an auctioneer?
I think that it's about respect and be not seeing the auctioneer as an adversary. In many cases, the auctioneer can guide you through and help. I think some people, it hasn't happened to myself, but I have seen other auctioneers, say, "Would you got any questions?" Or they offer some good-hearted advice, and it's taken the wrong way. It's like they're going to, especially with an independent auctioneer, it's like we're there just to bring the two parties together in a transparent environment. So I think not seeing the auctioneer as some sort of adversary.
Finally, just rounding it out, any investment principles, theories, tips, money tips that you want to share with us, Craig?
Yeah, I think once I touched on that, if you shouldn't worry about making your first property purchase one that you want to live in. That's number one.
Yep.
Number two is if you're going to look for a property to purchase, always look for some way to add value. The best way to do that is with an actual house on its own piece of land. But if you can't kind of get the money together for that, then sure, go with an apartment. But there's still things you can do to apartments to add value, but that's definitely something. And there's many different ways to add value. You can create extra rooms. You can, kitchens and bathrooms are big areas where you can improve on, but they're also compose
equity.
Yeah,
equity. I've got one more. One of your favourite muso stories. What? Just the
round
one.
It out. Come
just
on,
round
bring
it
it
out.
on.
One nice, one thing that just like if we were mates at a bar and you were telling one of your favourite stories, what would that be?
You see what's going on in Rosie's mind? He's thinking,
I've got so many stories, but they're all.
Is there one go-to story that you always know? I got to tell this story.
There's a lot like that.
They're R-rated.
I'll tell you something that happened to me.
Oh, yeah.
So the Jets used to do this tour from West Coast. We used to do from Broome to Kalgoorlie.
Oh, wow.
Okay? Yeah, wow, exactly.
Yeah, Kalgoorlie.
So it was a big tour, and we played a lot of mining towns,
Yeah.
Karratha, Carnarvon, Tom Price.
Yeah.
And anyway, we hadn't seen an attractive girl for a long time. It was a lot of guys. This one gig, I had this girl in the front row, pretty girl, blonde hair, and all the guys looking at each other were going, "Oh, finally." Anyway, so I think someone smiled at her, and she smiled back, and she was missing both her front teeth.
Rightio.
There you go.
That's a good one. That's keeping it G-rated.
Yeah,
I think that's really good.
It's
very G-rated.
Well, clearly there's a lot there, Ben. We've gone from starting in a band to opening a school of rock to
Number one
becoming an
selling album
auctioneer
in Australia at the time for the Jets.
But also importantly, the underlying message here is that you found the asset class of residential property to be your bedrock of where you wanted to store your wealth over this journey, and it sounds like that's where it continues to be. And I think our listeners will get a lot of benefit out of hearing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, it's great to be here with you guys, and you guys are doing a wonderful thing too.
Thanks, Rosie. That was cool.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate you coming on. So, Ben, just quickly, we were so excited to get into the interview. So
We didn't even talk about footy. Final season.
we didn't talk about footy, but that's probably not a bad thing.
Pies finish on a win. How did Freo go? Did they finish on a win?
So it's probably not a bad thing we didn't talk about footy.
Okay,
But
so we knocked Melbourne out.
do you know you haven't even
There we
heckled
go.
me the fact that you came home with a wet sail and beat me in the tips by 1? Do you know that?
No, I didn't even know.
Yeah,
And you know,
because you
I
threw
actually
a
I forgot to put my
haymaker.
tips in.
I know.
I forgot to put my tips in. So the first 3 games I missed tips,
Yeah,
and I still beat you. What's going on there?
One of them you got the away game, so that's like
What was my
cheating.
haymaker?
West Coast at the end.
Oh.
West Coast against Adelaide.
No, mate. When you're playing and you're in control of your own destiny,
So we won't talk about. Do you follow AFL in any way, shape, or form, or is it just rugby?
well, we
league?
can talk rugby.
Just rugby league. Where I
How
grew
about
up,
the Storm?
if you played or followed AFL, you get bashed up.
Bashed up. Yeah.
There you go.
Fair enough.
That's why we don't live in Newcastle.
There's no Newcastle. So my mindset minute is very quick, Ben. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's why inventors put erasers on pencils. J.K. Rowling 12 times rejected by the publishers before Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was accepted. Walt Disney 302 times he was turned down before he got financing for creating Disneyland. Dr. Seuss 27 times rejected by the publishers before the first book was published. To think that I saw it on Mulberry Street. And Thomas Edison said this: if I find 10,000 ways something won't work, I haven't failed, I'm not discouraged, because every wrong attempt discarded is another step forward. So
That's my did you know right there. There's numbers in that. That's perfect.
combined.
Yeah,
Oh.
combined. How
All right.
good's that?
Well, you wanna.
Yeah, I'm taking those numbers. So I like that. 12 times rejected. 302 times couldn't get finance for Disneyland.
But did you know?
Did you know? Because I haven't got one ready.
Did you know?
What's that?
You beat me in the footy tips.
Oh, there you go.
There
Did you know?
I
Very
helped you
good.
out, so. All right, terrific. Again, thanks for coming on to the Property Couch. We certainly appreciate you took the effort to fly down and do it in person rather than going over the internet, which I think is terrific. And we certainly wish you all the best with the auctioning. I'm sure you don't need any encouragement in that department.
And we'll have
Thanks,
your contact
guys.
details in the show notes so people can engage you as their auctioneer in Newcastle.
Be very happy.
There you go, Ben. Until next week.
Remember, Bryce, knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it.
Very good. All right, folks. We'll see you next week.
See you later.